Trinity Rodman is a player that she gets tired. She does get tired, but it's in bursts where you just like, oh, you're like, Rodman's tapped. And then she goes again. And then you're like, oh, that touch. Rodman's feet have to feel so heavy. That touch wasn't on. And then she scores that goal. She punches it in extra time. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special YouTube edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Is everyone breathing a sigh of relief? Is everyone ready to go take a nap? The United States women's national team defeats Japan in extra time today in that crucial quarterfinal matchup that does mean that they are guaranteed to either match or better their Tokyo finish and play for a medal. This game is not, there is no result in regulation. This goes into extra time. We're going to break it down a little bit. There might be a little bit less technical analysis today just because there's a little bit less technical analysis to talk about. It was not a very technical game, but the US are through. And maybe the big picture to start with is this is the point where really what matters is the results. You know, you get into the knockout rounds, survive in advance. If you're going to have to play a game like this, you might as well win it and not lose it. And I think that's kind of where the U.S. is. I do think still they are cutting losses in a way that maybe affects them in the semifinals, maybe affects them in a medal game. We will talk about that when that occurs. But again, if you're going to have to play a game like this, better to win it than to lose it. So setting the stage, everybody knows that the U.S. was pushed into a forced rotation in the midfield today due to yellow card accumulation by Sam Coffey. I was reading the comments of the last YouTube show that we did, and I thought a lot of the ideas were really creative. Emma Hayes, not quite so creative. She just kind of does a like for like. She puts Corbin Albert in to start in the midfield. Seemed maybe like it was going to be a double pivot where the U.S. was maybe going to be a little bit more conservative. It was that Albert, Horan, Lavelle midfield. You think maybe Horan's going to hold. It's going to be that triangle, but it's going to be a triangle like this where you have the two holding midfielders behind Lavelle. Did not turn out to be the case because for the second game in a row, we have seen a team decide, and I don't think they're wrong, and we'll talk about that, have decided that the best way to stop the U.S. is to go very conservative in the defense and hit them on the counter. Frustrate, make them run, make them think too hard, make them push forward in numbers, isolate the back line, profit. You know, the Japan comes out in a 5-back, which is very similar to what Australia did in the final group stage game. They cede a ridiculous amount of possession to the United States, who for the whole first half of this game was very happy to keep recycling the ball, passing the ball back, putting it on the center backs. I think at some point, like after the first half, Naomi Girma had completed more passes than Japan's entire team, which sure, a positive stat. Nice to see that Girma is so good on the ball, but also you don't want that from your center back. The attackers were not getting touches. That front three that has been so lethal of Swanson, Smith, and Rodman was very frustrated. Very good defending and very good spacing from Japan. Not surprised that they were that disciplined. And so the first half of this game, I would call negative. And I don't mean, well, maybe I do mean negative in quality, but I think negative just also in tactics, right? When you say that there's like a negative game plan, that means that you are willing to be passive about the game that's in front of you, and you're going to see it out and control it rather than push too far forward and make a mistake and have the other team capitalize, right? And so both Japan and the US were controlling this game for most of it. In just different ways. The U.S. was controlling the game because they had the ball. Again, they were recycling the ball a lot. I think Albert, a lot of back passes from Albert in the number 6, which I think twofold. I think sometimes she is way too willing to pass behind her. You even heard some fans start to boo as the U.S. recycled the ball over and over and over again. Negative play, right? Sort of that lateral conservative play. Now, but in Albert's defense, there wasn't a lot of motion in front of her. And I think that's where the U.S. fans get very, very scared, right? Because U.S. fans saw a lack of motion in the Andonovski era a lot. Other things that didn't go quite so well is in sort of this attempt to break down this low block, which like Hayes, I do think knew this was going to happen and planned for it correctly, or at least planned for it. I don't know if she made the right call, but I don't think she was surprised by the way Japan played. Neither really was I. I think I said this last time. They like to sit back. They like to hit you on the counter. I thought that Japan went too negative in this game. I think that they have way more quality on the ball than they showed in this tournament. I think that their finishing has been off a little bit. We saw that in that Brazil game until they came back to win 2-1, where, you saw missed chances on both sides. You saw the United States possess and possess and possess, try to get the ball through, not really get the right touch. The touches were very heavy. This was the first true day game that the United States has played over in France. You could tell they have not rotated their starting 11 very much. You could tell. And then the solution, the tactical solution that it seemed like Hayes landed on was putting Lindsey Horan sitting on that front line with Swanson and Rodman and Smith. That did not work, just kind of frankly. You saw Horan drifting wide a lot to the right at the beginning of the game, which honestly kind of disrupted the flow of what Lavelle and Rodman had been doing so well. You saw Horan just sort of individually have a tough game. Her passes were off. There were a couple, nice sequences where they were doing one touch and she would misplace the pass. You saw some turnovers from Horan. Just again, trying to do way too much, being given a new assignment and having a lot of trouble. Like I said, that's where the alarm bells go off for US fans, because that's so indicative of the Andonovski era, right? Where you have huge gaps between the defensive and the attacking midfield. I thought Albert did a nice job in cleaning things up. I mean, I thought that the US defense was excellent today. And when Japan did go forward, they snuffed things out. Japan was not so clinical on the counter, as they've struggled to be in this tournament. But that big space, it was my colleague, Kim McCauley, she coined the term the prayer circle attack of the United States, which is where you've got a huge gap in the midfield surrounded by United States players, where you've got like 4 or 5 players up top, which in this case was, Lavelle, Horan, and the front three. You've got your defensive midfielder sitting right in front of the back line, maybe with the ball, trying to figure out where to go with it. The U.S. front line can call for the ball, but how does the midfielder get the ball to them? There's nothing there. So Albert turns around, she recycles, she places it back on Germa or Sonnet. And that was the game for a lot of regulation. I don't know how critical I want to be of like individually. I mean, again, I do think Horan had a rough game. I think Albert looked new, but I think again, she played the conservative game well, in that she didn't make any big mistakes, but she just was not helpful in generating positive play. They were very much missing that element for Coffey. Like, this would have been a great game for Sam Coffey, because she is the kind of player where, although she can be exposed in defensive transition, she is the player you want on the ball when you have to make that right forward pass. She's so good at that. You also just saw some tired legs in the front line because they haven't been given a ton of a rest. Early in the game, I think maybe this is once we get to the actual goal that the United States does score. I don't actually mind the way that U.S. front line approached this, which was that they kind of caught runs at the beginning of the game. They were not going all out all the time. If the pass was not on, or if the touch was not on, they were happy to let Japan kind of recycle the ball, because Japan was also very happy to give it right back. That did allow them to make it through this full 90 and extra time, but you could see the fatigue. That is on Hayes. Though, again, I think we've talked about this a million times, where sort of the roster availability has impacted her ability to substitute. And I think she has just decided that this team is going to go as far as their starting 11 takes them. And so far, that is the medal rounds. I think that might come back to be an issue in the semifinals. So you get through a full 90 of this, you think multiple things, right? You think, well, the shape isn't working, right? Horan on the front line is not a solution. For all the things she does well, that is no longer one of them. She doesn't really move with pace. She doesn't feel comfortable. Again, even just the passing sequences were not clean. If she's tired, she gets the heavy touches that everyone else has. But even with sort of her spacing, she kind of gums up the works that were already gummed up because the game was so compact. And it was just interesting to me, because usually when that happens, or has happened in the past for the United States, is because Lavelle has not been available. Lavelle was great. She's actually had a really good tournament, not really understanding why Horan was either instructed to or felt the need to sort of compensate for what Lavelle needed to do, when what Lavelle needed was a connecting midfielder behind her to help progress the ball and make the passes forward more incisive. So, it was fine. I mean, they can only play what's in front of them. Japan is a very good team. This is how Japan has played every single game this tournament. And I think ultimately Japan's downfall was an unwillingness or an inability to kind of play their best game. Japan isn't you could see even the moments where they got numbers forward, they were making these really nice passes inside. They were getting into dangerous areas. Again, the finishing was not there, but I just felt like Japan could have opened it up more. And I know maybe they were afraid that would, bite them in the back line, but I don't know. But this is also knockout soccer, and this is what you get. I'm like waffling a lot, because I am like, so much of knockout soccer, you can kind of gut your way to the medal rounds. But let's talk about the goal that the United States does score, because they go into extra time. Hayes does make some substitutions. Well, actually, just the one. She swaps Lynn Williams in for Mallory Swanson. So Mallory Swanson did not have to play 120 today. She only played 90. I guess, measured like, thank goodness for Mallory Swanson. She gets a day off only playing 90 minutes. Lynn Williams comes on. Williams, I think, actually gave a nice boost off of the bench today. I think she did a better job disrupting the Japanese back line. Japan's defense started to also tire. I think mentally, this is a very difficult kind of game to play without the ball so much. You just have to be so sharp for the full 120 minutes if you're going to let the other team possess as much as they let the United States possess. But Williams has not been her sharpest in front of goal in this tournament, which kind of makes sense with sort of where her fitness was at. And then Hayes let the starters figure it out. She did that against Germany, though they obviously had a much more positive game state. And she did it against Japan. I think the more I cover soccer, the kinder I get about substituting patterns. I think sometimes it feels very obvious from home that you need a change, right? But she didn't do that. Hayes didn't do that. She let the United States starters end this game, and Trinity Rodman delivered. Beautiful goal from Trinity Rodman. And I think this is where I think you just sort of sing the praises of some individual players, because like I said, this game was played to neutral. It was played to null. It was played to 0-0. The coaches canceled each other out completely. It was going to take something exceptional individually, and Trinity Rodman did it. Now, Trinity Rodman is a player that Jason Anderson was talking about this on Twitter today, but like, she gets tired. She does get tired, but it's in bursts. And when she was younger, you could actually see it. The thing that would happen to Trinity Rodman a lot in her first couple years in the NWSL is she would have these bursts of speed, and then she would kind of fall awkwardly, and her back would hurt. People might remember this, where when she was younger, she would go down and she would kind of grab her lower back, and you could tell that she was in a lot of pain. And you would think, oh my goodness, is Trinity Rodman okay? Like, is this a chronic thing? Like, what's going on? But then it was like sort of once she had sort of filtered through that sort of zap of pain in her back, she'd be right back up and she'd be going again. Now, it seems like her fitness in that regard has actually really improved, which I'm happy to see. It's a little bit less localized. She doesn't have that particular issue so much anymore. But you still see the waves where you just like, oh, you're like, Rodman's tapped. And then she goes again. And then you're like, again, you're like, oh, that touch. Rodman's feet have to feel so heavy. That touch wasn't on. And then she scores that goal. She punches it in extra time. That is so impressive. I've sung Rodman's praises multiple times so far in this tournament. It is indicative of her growth from last year and her growth as a player from when she joined the league in NWSL, went early. What an incredible tournament she is having. She has had a goal contribution in all 4 games so far. She is undroppable, completely undroppable. And not for nothing, I want to say one more thing about Trinity Rodman. She was the other player going into that final group stage game who was on a yellow card and could have been suspended either for this quarterfinal or for the semifinal. And she has been criticized in the past for running hot. She did not do that once in their last group stage game. It did not do that once in this quarterfinal. Her maturity is so nice to see, because there were a couple calls that didn't get called. There was a stomp on Swanson's foot at the beginning of the game. There was a clear foul on Rodman later in the game that did not get called. I just have been so impressed with her as a player all around. And it's so fun. One of the great things about following a player like that, from her introduction to the professionals or to the pros all the way to now, is seeing that growth. And so Rodman does something amazing at the very end of the first half of extra time. She gets it on the wing, just like she had multiple times in the game. That's why you keep generating passes. That's why you keep trying to open up space. She hits a gorgeous ball in from the right side. The U.S. goes up 1-0. And it just seemed like that was probably that. Here is my one, though. I'm going to say one more nice thing about Hayes is I did actually like the way she closed things out in extra time. Again, you want more subs. They bring Niswanger on. Emily Fox goes down with an injury, which is very nervy for the United States. That's going to be something that's going to be an issue probably going forward for a team that is already carrying multiple injuries. I just do not believe that Jaden Shaw was able to play in this game. She makes the bench. She's back in the 18. Croy Bethune is now back on the alternate list. I just fundamentally do not think that Jaden Shaw is fit. Otherwise, I think she would have been brought into the game when they were chasing that goal. I don't think penalties would have probably gone that great for either team. They both looked really tired and the finishing was off all game. So Emily Fox comes off and they bring Casey Kruger on. But for as negative, like I said, as negative tactically things were happening in this game, at the end, they did not fold. And I think that is a sort of that steadiness that the U.S. has been looking for, where, yes, I think Hayes, her greatest sin today was probably inactivity. And as has been sort of this bet on the starting 11 throughout the whole tournament, like at that point, that just is what it is. I don't even know if it's worth criticizing anymore because it is what's happening. She is going to let the starting 11 of this team carry them all the way as they possibly can. But she didn't like fall into a 5 back. They didn't completely see, like, obviously Japan was pushing and they got on the ball more at the end of the game. Like, that's pretty natural. And again, Japan's a very good team, but they didn't go negative. They kept pushing for a second goal. They were just as likely to score as Japan was in the second half of extra time when things started to stretch, maybe again indicative of why Japan played the game the way that they did. And I liked that too. I do think that the Olympics are a funny tournament. I mean, I haven't checked it because we're recording, but like as I started recording, Spain was down 2-0 on Colombia. The quarterfinal round is nervy. It's the moment things get real for everybody and you don't have time to figure it out. You can't kind of ignore that feeling of like, if we lose this, we're going home. And if we win this, we're going to play for a medal. I think it's a very difficult round to get through. It's the first time the United States has actually won a quarterfinal game since 2012. They advanced in penalties in Tokyo. I just think that the way that Hayes has basically just instilled confidence into this team, you know, with a tournament that's kind of based on vibes, that works. And so, yeah, I think like it's kind of this strange thing where I did think that the United States had sort of, like I said, negative tactics today, where the recycling was not super brave. They were not super brave. They were really concerned with not turning the ball over, and they didn't so much. So as far as Japan was able to score. But at the end, when they had the win, you saw that confidence come back out that we had seen in the group stage. So does this game portend bad things for the semifinal? Probably. They're exhausted. Going to extra time in this case is not what this 11 needed. And they're going to have to kind of find new wells of energy where there might just not be any. And eventually things are going to slip. I also want to shout out the tournament that once again Naomi Girma is having. I say this all like as a positive, where I'm like, you know, they cancel each other out, but without a player like Girma, I'm not sure the United States does cancel Japan out on those counters. Girma is so good. I thought Sonnet did a really nice job defensively, or even if she did get turned, there was good help defense. I think that they've really figured out those help defensive patterns where they have players come in to help double quickly. They missed Tierna Davidson's forward pass a lot in this game. They missed Sam Coffey's forward passes a lot in this game. They're getting Coffey back in the semifinal. I think at this point it's unlikely Davidson returns. I would love to be wrong. And I also want to shout out the play of Crystal Dunn, who played basically like 6 positions today, as is the way that she does all the time for the United States. She has had this renaissance as a defender despite being on this team as a forward. I mean, I will admit, you know, you looked at the 2023 World Cup and has done at this point maybe aged out of being the starting fullback for this team. And the way the team plays in the 3-back, in possession, the way they fall back into that more 4-4-2 out of possession has really allowed Dunn to shine. And so I understand why she is starting as a defender on this team. I think that Hayes has actually unlocked some of the best of Crystal Dunn in recent years for the United States. So really nice play from the back line to keep this 0-0 and give the attack their shot. So I will say this, going into the semifinal, I keep saying this and it's like, it sounds so simple, but if the United States attack isn't hitting, the defense shows up. And if the attack is hitting, the defense gets a night off, right? So today, the defense had to do the work. And then the attack kind of got it together and Rodman was able to pull that out of a hat. Or they pull ahead and the defense just kind of has to see things through. That's good. That's vibes-based coaching. And sometimes in the international game, when you have a team as talented as the United States, that's what works. So the U.S. is on to the semifinal. Win a semifinal, they're playing for a gold medal. Lose a semifinal, they are playing for bronze. They will play either Canada or Germany, 2 teams they know very, very well. So excited for that. Maybe. We'll see. They seem tired. The good news of having Kruger on the roster is that if Fox can't go, they do have a replacement for her. Good roster management from Hayes there. But yeah, just really nice to see. And like I said, it's a funny old tournament. This is the big test. The quarterfinal is one of the biggest tests of all, and the United States make it through. And that's what you want to see when you're following this team. So if you see kind of like me sort of waving my hands a little bit, I am just like, when we get into this point in the tournament, it's just who can grit it out, who has the magic on any given day. And today it was the United States. So excited to see them in the semifinal, excited to see who they're matched up against, and also just excited to see what happens on the other end because, like I said, already spicy stuff happening in the quarterfinals today. And we will be back later this week to talk about all of that. We'll be talking about their semifinal, we'll be talking about their final. We're going to have a lot more Olympic coverage for you. I keep saying this. If you are here for the first time on our YouTube channel, please subscribe. We have a lot of great video content coming out through the entirety of the Olympics. I want to shout out my producer, Parker Fenton, for hopping up on a Saturday to get this rolling. And we'll check you next time because the United States is still going, and so are we. I've been your host, Claire Watkins, and this has been The Late Sub.